Hello and welcome to the Reason Roundtable. This is the podcast of free minds, free markets, and free takes. I'm your host, Peter Suderman, and today I am joined by my illustrious colleagues, Katherine Mangu-Ward, Matt Welch, and Nick Gillespie. Everybody say hello.
Howdy.
Hello.
Hi.
Happy Monday, and may every day be a wonderful secret this week. Well, I guess we're going to have to talk about Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. We've not talked about Epstein very much on this podcast. The last time was a few months ago when Attorney General Pam Bondi handed out a binder of Epstein documents to a select group of MAGA influencers. But this story will not go away. In the last week, it has become bigger than ever and threatened to consume the Trump presidency because MAGA influencers weren't satisfied with the binder, and they have pushed the Trump administration to release more files. Just last week, the Wall Street Journal reported on a cryptic birthday note that the paper says was written by Trump to Epstein. It references a secret and says that enigmas never age. In response, Donald Trump has sued the paper for $10 billion, which is a lot of money. That's actually more than DOGE is going to save us in the rescission bill. So I have two basic takes here. First, live by the fringe, dive by the fringe, right? Live by the fringe, die by the fringe, not dive, right? Trump is feeling the heat from a fire that he poured gasoline on. And second, this is a government transparency story. So, Nick, I want to start with you. Last time we talked about Epstein, you kind of dismissed it. You said people who are obsessed with the Epstein files are searching for something else. You said that people are searching for a skeleton key into a big conspiracy that does not exist. I know, Nick, that you have often been frustrated with the kind of circus atmosphere around Trump and the kookier, more salacious stuff that people focus on. You have argued that libertarians should be much more concerned with policy, with regulation, with the size of government, rather than say whether Trump is vulgar or some of the more conspiratorial aspects of his fandom. So what do you make of all of this, and what should libertarians make of the Epstein story?
No, I take it all back now, and obviously the Epstein, files are the secret skeleton key that will unlock everything. You framed it right in the sense that Donald Trump came to power the second time around, at least, partly by, fanning the flames of this kind of stuff. Not him directly, but all of the people around him, including people like Kash Patel, the FBI director, who is eating every scrap of, on a big plate of crow that Dan Bongino has not yet, his deputy, has not just choked down. But these were people who were saying in the late Trump years, as when Epstein was arrested again and then committed suicide in jail, that this was a conspiracy that went all the way to the top, and it showcased everything that was bad and rotten in DC, in the establishment, in the global power elite, because we were talking about an intergalactic confederacy of pedophiles who were all flying in and out of Epstein's island, et cetera. And now it's coming back to bite them on the ass because Donald Trump, who said he would release this stuff, said there's nothing there. So you live by it, you die by it. But the twin side of this is that, or the other element of this, is that Tulsi Gabbard, and I know we'll talk about this after Epstein, but has now just laid out in a long Twitter thread and has delivered documents to the Department of Justice, claiming that the Obama administration, which implicates people like Joe Biden, most obviously, pursued a treasonous conspiracy against Donald Trump's presidency by claiming the whole, by planting the Russiagate hoax. So what we are in for now is a continuation of the past 8 years, but at a much higher level, where we're going to have dueling conspiracies, both deeply entwined in the Trump White House. And Trump is going to try to throw people off the idea that he failed his followers by not releasing all of the Epstein files, whatever that means, and the Epstein client list and all of the blackmail that Epstein was able to put over on people by going after Russiagate. So, we're in it now. And when you talk about a government transparency story, there should be more government transparency. But what people are looking for now it goes beyond transparency, and it is just an attempt to unmask the other side as, evil aliens from a distant planet that are pretending to be human and run everything. And it just leads to madness.
Well, we've got a lot more of that madness coming up. We have a big show, much more on the Epstein case and libertarian approaches to government transparency. Also, Tulsi Gabbard, as Nick mentioned, she's released a new report on Russiagate. She says it shows a treasonous conspiracy. Does she have the goods, or is there something else going on here? Also, the DOGE cuts finally come through. The rescission bill went through Congress. $9 billion in clawbacks, including funding for public broadcasting. So is Big Bird doomed? Is liberal media as we know it over? As always, you deserve better choices in politics, and we're going to talk about them more in just a moment. Before we move on, though, just wanted to say a huge thanks to everyone who came out to our live show in New York last week. You packed the Village Underground. We talked about the news. It was
really
awesome.
Fun.
Yeah, we talked about the news. We answered your questions. But most important, we had a really great time at meeting you, our loyal listeners. So whether you came to the show or whether you watched the live stream at home, thank you. Thank you so much for making what we do possible. We hope to do a whole lot more of this in the near future. All right, the Epstein story is sprawling, complicated, packed with rumor and salacious innuendo, as well as some actual facts. There's genuinely a lot we don't know about the elite financier who was arrested on sex trafficking charges and then died in his jail cell in 2019. But the basic story as it pertains to Trump is something like this. Online, parts of Trump's MAGA fan base became obsessed with the Epstein case. They believed that there was a cover-up or a conspiracy to protect powerful people, including high-ranking Democrats, who had engaged in sexual crimes, probably with minors. Trump stoked this belief amongst his supporters in various ways, including implying unsavory connections between Epstein and former President Bill Clinton. But it turns out that Trump himself has a long personal history with Epstein. And now that he's in office, Trump has been playing down the idea that there's anything else to be learned from the story. And the Trump administration has been reluctant to release the full case files, even though Trump said that he would definitely take a look at that while he was in office, if he became president, while he was running for president. So there's a lot going on here. I don't think we can get to all the angles or theories, even if we tried. But in so many ways, maybe not all, but in many ways, this strikes me as a very basic government transparency story. The government has information it's keeping secret. There's no obvious justification for doing so. So, Katherine, I want to start with you. What do you say? Release the Epstein files?
So my first and most important point is a grammatical one. There is a difference between a conspiracy and a conspiracy theory. And we should keep that in mind, because actually calling it a conspiracy validates the conspiracy theory sometimes. Jesse Walker, who is Reason's foremost expert on conspiracy theories, he literally wrote a book about it, would want me to insist on this. I want to insist on this. So first, that very important thing is out of the way. Second, I think, this is classic, right? Politicians don't like secrecy when they're running for office, and they love it once they hold office. And there's nothing special about this case. This is true for everything. Oh, national security. The American people should know more about what's going on in name your foreign country where the CIA is noodling around. Sure, everyone agrees with that until they're in the White House, and then they get the little dossier and they're like, oh, this is stuff the American public probably won't be smart about. Let's not tell them. And that just happens over and over and over.
So there is something special about it in the sense that it involves rich people, at least one rich person, Jeffrey Epstein, as well as powerful people have been named. Prince Andrew has been at least named as part of this story. Bill Clinton has been named by Donald Trump as part of this story. And it involves sex, right? And so that in and of itself, those three factors do make it special to some people.
I guess, but again, this is true of so many of the kind of chunks of information that the federal government may or may not hold, that politicians in the end decide not to release once they have the ability to do that. And I think this is like, we've been through this with like the JFK stuff. We've been through this, like there will always be UFOs. There will always be people who think there is more, who will not relinquish the belief that there is more. And what they're actually talking about is this true thing, which is that governments keep secret from the people. They keep secrets all the time from the populace, and people are mad about that, and they deserve as much transparency as they want.
But Bondi was actually who I'm absolutely no fan of. Like she said, there is not a client list because what the conspiracy theory is that Jeffrey Epstein was like running a pimping operation. And he was, whenever Prince Andrew got horny, he would say like, okay, fly on the Lolita Express, come to my island and you'll be serviced. And then on top of it, that Prince Andrew was being blackmailed. And it's important to point out Prince Andrew is a piece of garbage, both by heredity and by his own behavior. And he settled with one of the main, the person who became the most known face in terms of the victims, the underage girls who were trafficked here, who committed suicide earlier this year. So, there is something wrong here. And Epstein was found guilty, or, he entered a plea, which was brokered by somebody who ended up in the Trump cabinet. That was awful and an injustice. This is, Epstein he was able to buy his way out of a serious criminal penalty for his actions. But none of that means that there is a client list or what Bondi, and what Bondi also said is that there's no evidence that there was blackmail, committed on this, which is essential to the theory that somehow Jeffrey Epstein is both running a worldwide, global pedophile ring, but then using that as blackmail against people. And this is a big part, particularly if you're in the Tucker Carlson camp, that he was running all of this for Mossad or was somehow sharing all of this information, not just with any intelligence agency, but Mossad, our biggest enemy. And there's no evidence of any of this. There are assertions. There's no evidence. And I don't see that. The irony here isn't that the government isn't being clear. It's that Trump set a trap for himself and then jumped through it.
Peter, you said earlier that that there aren't any that there aren't big reasons to keep this stuff secret, or you said something close to that effect.
No obvious reason, right?
Obvious reason. I think there are a couple of obvious reasons to keep some of the stuff redacted. One is that it involves a case that is being appealed at the Supreme Court as we speak. Ghislaine Maxwell's case is being appealed, and it also involves a number of alleged underage victims. And also people on the Alan Dershowitz scale, or more like Bill Clinton, let's say. Alan Dershowitz has been involved in litigation and settlements and things like that involving this, and his accusers turned out to be kind of crazy. And he has not been successfully prosecuted in any way, shape, or form as part of this. But it includes the name of famous people who then, what do you do when their names just show up on a flight log or whatever? There are sensical reasons to do this. Those reasons have not generally been cited by the Pam Bondis and Dan Bonginos of the world. You don't hear them say, we'd like to release this, but we have this pending trial and we don't want to jeopardize it. The Supreme Court. That makes sense. But what Pam Bondi did instead was that she invited Pizzagate conspiracy theorists to the White House and gave them a trapper keeper full of bullshit. She fed the populist conspiracy bait theory. She did not take this seriously, and she set up an expectation that there was going to be some next great, wonderful revelation, and then the dog caught the car, and we have what we have right now. And it's on some level kind of hilarious to watch from afar. On another level, it's very distressing to see people who are in senior positions in government and law enforcement stoking a base on conspiratorial nonsense. And then suddenly having to say, well, oops, we can't do it. Bureaucracies cover themselves up because bureaucracies cover themselves up. There's always going to be embarrassing stuff associated with the investigation. There was way too much stuff in this case that was classified or just not released on grand jury testimony, trial transcripts, etc. That was released thanks to the work of the Miami Herald and some other organizations. And this led directly to Epstein being rearrested in 2019, as did the Me Too movement. Let's not forget that too. And so it's useful to have more of that information. And I do not doubt that some of the reason for slow walking this information is that it's going to be embarrassing on sources and methods. How do you know this information? Like anything involving Prince Andrew, for example. And also just like, how did that sweetheart deal get done in 2007 is embarrassing to some people. And I would presume that that is part of the reason why this is being slow walked. But there is no indication that this administration and the senior figures in it have treated this seriously. And that goes to the top. Donald Trump, when he has been calling his own followers losers and gullible, and he's lost respect for them, and they're doing the fake news hoax, whatever, what he's now calling the Jeffrey Epstein hoax. He has spread a bunch of crazy conspiracy theories about that. He's saying this originated with James Comey. It's like, what are you even talking about?
And Obama and Clinton and Biden created the Epstein files.
Yeah.
And the ultimate, this is the irony for the people who believed in Trump, is that in the end, Trump says everybody is a liar. Everybody is in power is a liar. The deep state is everywhere. People were screwing me over. I get in charge, and then when you say, okay, release the files, and he says, no, and you got to trust me. And if you don't believe me, go fuck yourselves. And this is where this was always going to end. Because if you create think of it as a TV show, like if it's set in a fictional universe where everybody is corrupt and rotten and evil, even your champion, that final scene is going to be when they take the crown, and then they either kill you or they disappoint you. And that's what it is here. Trump,
I love the idea that the Epstein story is fundamentally Shakespearean, but I want to talk about what Matt mentioned, which is just sort of the fundamental lack of seriousness here, because that's something we see all over the Trump administration in many aspects of it, not just in the Epstein files, right? The Trump administration is full of, I don't know non-traditional figures, right? Folks like Dan Bongino, who's apparently quite upset about the administration's lack of interest in the Epstein files. Robert F. Kennedy, in a different way, who's brought what at least some people see as a kind of quasi-conspiratorial approach to vaccines and public health, right?
Some people. It's easier if you just say a few people who don't think that, right?
Yeah.
That's
part of his selling proposition.
Some people definitely have said that. And so there is this idea that comes from Matt Iglesias, who has called this the crank realignment, in which the cranks and weirdos used to be spread out on the right and the left. But now, over the last 10 years under Trump, they've all been kind of rehomed to the Republican Party. Katherine, do you think there is anything to that? Is this just sort of an outgrowth of the crank realignment?
I am always sensitive to the crank label because there are lots of people who think we're cranks. And I just want to keep that in mind, that there is, the cranks are just the people who are heterodox or out of power in some cases. Also the crazy people, right? And so that's the tricky part, is sorting out those two categories. Again, while I agree with everything that Matt and Nick just said, I am sympathetic to people who just fundamentally don't believe that the government is telling them the truth. Because I also fundamentally don't believe that, right? Like, that is pretty core to my politics, is that the sort of rules and procedures that are required by our justice system are constantly being violated, are only being honored in the breach, and that if there is information that will hurt people in power, they will withhold it if they can. And I think this happens in a way that kind of feels hypocritical and is hypocritical when politicians run as outsiders, right? Trump even for his re-election, he ran as an outsider, and those bills come due. And I think that's always going to be the case, is if you are I'm an outsider, the people who also identify as outsiders, the quote unquote cranks, are going to cluster around you. Libertarians tried and just didn't stick to this cluster very well. And I think that is to our credit. But I just always want to keep in mind that calling a bunch of people who believe heterodox stuff cranks, some of them in fact are, and some of them are just holding views that are out of favor.
If I may, though, the idea that all of the cranks are on the right now is very easy for somebody who is in the progressive camp to say, because this gets to, the second point, or the big story that came out over the weekend, which has to do with Russiagate. The people in the media and the people on the left who are still proclaiming that Donald Trump is somehow a Russian agent or only got into office because he colluded with the Russian government, under Putin and things like that. There was a steady, years worth of this drumbeat, and it isn't fully over yet. So the idea that all the cranks are on the right gets it half right. There are a ton of cranks on the right. The Trump administration, particularly 2.0, seems to be almost completely fundamentally unserious in policy. And that is a big, big problem. But the idea that people on the left are somehow, they've been bleached of all of the weirdos and the cranks and the idiots and the conspiracy theorists on that side, that's just bullshit.
I also think, this is a Jesse Walker themed podcast in the sense that I think Jesse is the person who, in his writing for Reason, has gotten right that on this type of stuff, left and right become almost nonsensical. I think they're useful categories. I use them to talk about American politics. There are some people that say we should never use those terms. I think they're wrong. But it is certainly true that we have people who identified as being on the left who are now, look what you made me do, right-wingers, right? Like, so these are people who were vaccine skeptic, for example, people who were vaccine skeptics who became so alienated by the kind of lefty COVID culture that they're single issue voters, and their issue was now what they perceive to be on the right. So that is real. That did happen. And I think that, yes, of course, it's ridiculous to be like, well, thank God that we on the left are now free of all this crankery. Like, that's bullshit. The left is full of insane people. But, RFK Jr. is a thing, and he was a lefty, and now he is, for all intents and purposes, a righty, if those categories make sense, which in the place that he is living, I would argue they basically don't.
So, Katherine, are you both sidesing? Or are you arguing for a horseshoe theory? Or both?
I'm arguing for a horseshoe theory. I am arguing for left and right are not useful ways to classify the various insanities of our politics and also the various fringeries of our politics, not all of which are insane.
Speaking of things that are hard to classify in left and right, let's move on to Tulsi Gabbard and Russia. So Gabbard is the director of national intelligence, and she's clearly on poor terms with the Trump administration right now. Obviously, she did not want to bomb Iran. And a lot of people have wondered if, because of her opposition, she is on the way out of the administration. Last week, however, she released a 100-and-something page report looking back at Russiagate. She says that the report shows that in 2016, there was a, quote, treasonous conspiracy by officials in the Obama administration to harm or otherwise go after Donald Trump. Democrats have already dismissed the report. They say it's baseless. It's full of errors. Again, this report is long. We can't discuss every detail in it. But the short version is that it alleges that the intelligence community could not find clear evidence of Russian interference in the election. Yet top Obama administration officials essentially forced the intelligence agencies to play up Russian interference anyway. So Matt Welch, I want to start with you here. What do you think? Does Tulsi Gabbard have anything interesting, anything worth paying attention to, or is she just trying to save her own hide?
I don't know what her motivations are, and I try to spend my life not divining the motivations of Tulsi Gabbard among other politicians, although hair goals for all of us, I do believe. But the there, as far as I can tell, is interesting to me. It basically alleges and has evidence to at least back up or point in that direction that over 3 or 4 days in December of 2016, the lame duck Obama administration did some curious things. It was about ready to receive a presidential daily briefing on December 7th, a day that will live in infamy, saying that basically, Russia tried to mess with elections in the way that they kind of always do, the sort of influence political opinion and sow division. And it's not that big of a deal. And they, just as successful as they generally always are. This is under Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, who obviously is a cartoon villain, but that was nonetheless where he was coming from. And he was about ready to put it in there. And it's a short bureaucratic kind of a chain of people who are involved. And the FBI is like, nope, take our names off of it. James Comey, take our names off of it. And so like, what's going on here? Then there was about the next day, December 8th, I believe, there was a all hands on deck national security meeting chaired by Obama himself and a bunch of other people. at which they decided to do not just sort of a small little thing, but a much broader, comprehensive assessment from the intelligence communities that made much stronger claims about Russia's motivations and attempts to meddle in the affairs of the 2016 election. And this was an assignment. This was an agreed on story assignment. All right, we're dissatisfied with this sort of downplaying-ish thing. We're going to look at a much broader claim. So go start looking. And within minutes of go start looking, there were stories in the New York Times and Washington Post saying, intelligence officials think that there's a lot of smoke there. They went with a conclusion almost before they even started doing the evidence, looking into it. I think that's interesting to the extent of which we've had presidential scandals involving intelligence. It's usually presidents attempting, or vice presidents in some cases, attempting to sort of stovepipe intelligence and come to conclusions first and then actions afterwards. I think that the timing of this is strange. I think that Tulsi Gabbard, just as a person, is strange. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence, I don't think should be going around and accusing anyone, really, of treasonous conspiracy, which is a pretty big thing, let alone a former president. You're leading with a really strong claim there. I think the information is interesting. It's also interesting that previous attempts under Trump's first administration to investigate this same topic led to kind of nothing, a shrug. So that's also curious. I think she's setting herself up for a lot of expectations. And I'm going to take the under at that, whether she's going to meet those expectations. But at minimum, to me, that little December TikTok is interesting. It suggests that Obama, on the way out the door, was setting up kind of an all hands on deck, wait, there might be some weird Russia stuff here. And then that led pretty quickly to what became the Comey investigation in Russiagate, in which there was not a lot of there, it turned out.
Nick, what do you think of the timing here? Is this just an attempt to change the subject?
Donald Trump, like all presidents before him, is a master of trying to change the subject. And he also hires people or employs people who want to change the subject. And, the timing is good for Tulsi Gabbard, right, to be coming out with this. The timing is good for Donald Trump to come up with a story that might push, and this is where it gets complicated, a story that might push his multi-billion-dollar lawsuit against the Wall Street Journal and against Rupert Murdoch, like somebody who clearly wanted him to become president in 2016, in 2020, and in 2024. Probably not going to work that well because this is where conspiracies go to die. There are very few conspiracies that actually function on an ongoing, consistent and efficient way. And what you're seeing here is Donald Trump doing what he does best, which is create chaos. And what you see are a bunch of people in the media and elsewhere who are going to pick up on this. Ro Khanna, a lefty, a far left Democratic congressman, is working with Thomas Massie to get the Epstein files, whatever that means, release the stuff that isn't out there. So we're going to be embroiled in all of this kind of stuff to make sure that we don't talk about things like the budget deficit and the incredible idiocy, the obvious and predictable idiocy of the big, beautiful bill as that starts landing on the economy like a ton of bricks.
Katherine, Tulsi Gabbard has often been a figure of some interest to libertarians. There was a period of time we've talked about where we could just sort of put Tulsi Gabbard in a headline on our website. And it was like pretty good guarantee that we were going to get a lot of traffic from that. People who have libertarian ideas or interested in libertarian news wanted to read about Tulsi Gabbard. And you at times have said nice things about Tulsi Gabbard, and not just because of her hair. So the release of these files here, the insinuation that the Obama administration was engaged in something deeply nefarious, do you find her more appealing or less so because of this?
I don't even know. I don't know how to answer that question. I mean, I think this, it gets back to what I was saying earlier in the pod, which is she is one of the many avatars in the Trump administration of previous governments have lied to us and have behaved in ways that are obscurantist and shitty. And I am here to solve that problem. But also, I am part of a government that is lying to you and is obscurantist and shitty. And first and foremost is driven by politics. And I think that that's the main thing. It's like nowhere in this discussion is anyone like seriously asking, wondering, or thinking that we are going to solve the question, like, is Putin in charge of American politics or something? Like, is he our real president now? Like,
I don't think he's our real president.
It's
now.
all
No, it's Putin or Netanyahu, right?
or Netanyahu. But
we
like,
know
the
that
point
it's not Trump or Biden. Yeah.
just as the allegations here in the Tulsi thread flowchart.
There's a flowchart. There's I believe, a memo or some sort of press release and then there is a long report, and like each one summarizes the other one.
I do appreciate communicating via flowchart. I like that. I'm in favor. But in the flowchart, the allegation is essentially like Obama thought there might be a political advantage in this information coming to him differently, and then potentially coming out in the press differently than the first draft. And he was like, go look again. That might be helpful to me later. And that happens all the time. The idea that Obama was like maybe immune to that or better than other presidents or like the second coming of Jesus, I think is always worth puncturing. At the same time, the timing of the release, the hide saving potentially by Gabbard, like all of that is just, it's sort of the dirtiest form of just like public choice. It's just people protecting themselves, protecting their turf, protecting their jobs, and hoping that the American public will kind of absorb the costs or pay the bill.
It is funny that this is all coming out in flowchart form, given how many of the liberal Trump is definitely like a tool of Russia theories were communicated in flowchart. Nick, what do you have to say?
No, I was just, the real question, I think, ultimately from a libertarian point of view, because, it goes to how do you restore trust and confidence in government, or how do you shrink it so that all of these idiots can be talking about this stuff and it's not going to end up materially affecting our lives. And it's important to see this as, we are in the 10th act of a Twitter thread tragedy that has /N. We don't know how many entries are in this and how far we are from the end of it. But going back at least to LBJ, or, let's, for the conspiracy freaks, to the JFK assassination, which, Tucker Carlson, when he was going on and on at Turning Point USA recently about how terrible the Epstein file was and how Trump is a liar, just managed to say in passing. And of course, we know the CIA, we all know that the CIA killed Kennedy. We have been going down this line of having no trust, no confidence in anything the government says. Everything the government does to kind of claim back just makes it worse. And to me, the interesting question is can we conceptualize an end to this spiral? What can happen? What might happen where people say, okay, we have reached the end of this. The Laverne and Shirley gang are they bought the Dude Ranch in California for a season. That was not ratings gold. We're just ending it and we're rebooting, or we're starting a new series, because I just don't see any way out of this. Everybody is consuming each other, and then it leaves the rest of us who are not insane, who are interested in government transparency, who are interested in government efficiency. Where, how do we start that new season or that new show where we actually start talking about things that ultimately really matter from a libertarian perspective? I just
see all of this through, this is going to be a Matt Welch metaphor here. I see all of it through Hanlon's razor-colored glasses. That's where I am.
Wait, are you wearing razors on your eyeballs?
I'm wearing razors in my eyeballs, which seems possibly more appealing than talking about this anymore, honestly. That could be a more appealing option, for sure. It's assume, incompetence rather than malice. Assume idiocy, not conspiracy. This vibe is what gets us through all of this. Everyone is bad at their jobs. No one knows what's going on. And by everyone, I mean Russia also. right? Like the sort of original underlying explanation for what happened in that election with Russian interference is like, maybe they kind of tried and weren't great at it. And that still seems to be like the most parsimonious, most powerful explanation for all of that. And then we just layered stupid politics and cover-ups and conspiracies and conspiracy theories on top of all of it. I think the same might well be true of Epstein. It's just like, always assume everyone is a bungling idiot and everything makes sense.
Matt, what do you got to say?
I want to talk to everyone about it. No, just this relates back to the other thing I wanted to say, which was before we start embracing a recrankification or whatever the hell that was, that I think it is true on one level that Republicans have more obvious cranks in high positions of government. Starting with the president. But at the same time, you can't live through COVID without saying that, you know what, the left has some crank problems too. There was an entire era where we were celebrating some absolutely insane lady in Florida who was making allegations about Ron DeSantis' information collection and people like begging her to run for president. The way that this has valence to all of what we've talked about today is that there's a baseline set of beliefs, even by the non-crank Democrats, again, starting with their president, last one on down, that there's an entire group of people who are so deplorable that they want to actually gamble with the lives of children in the case of Ron DeSantis and other people. Joe Biden said this several times. I can't believe that he's putting lives at risk for political gain. That is a conspiracy theory, and it's being done by the president, who then acts on it in such a way to punish people, to crack down on the speech of people. And it's based on a similar bedrock belief that there is, some block in this country, 35%, 40%, who are irredeemably evil. And the only thing we can do is sort of strike them from polite society and assume that they're going to be doing their worst in every pizza shop or in every governor's mansion. All of that thinking is bad thinking. All of it is. And to say that it's only lopsided on one side of the political spectrum is another act of trying to be too clever by half for people who aren't clever at all.
All right. For our next act, we're going to take a question about us. Do we get along? Find out after this advertisement. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Men today face so much pressure to perform, to provide, to keep everything together. So it's no wonder that 6 million men in the United States suffer from depression every year, and it's not always diagnosed. But folks, it's okay to struggle. Real strength comes from opening up about what you're carrying and doing something about it so you can be your best self for yourself, but also for the others in your life. If you're a man and you're feeling the weight of the world, talk to someone, a loved one, a friend, or a therapist. Therapy can help you learn positive coping skills, how to set boundaries. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself. With over 35,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform. It serves over 5 million people globally. It's convenient, too. You can join a session with a therapist at the click of a button, helping you fit therapy into your busy life. Plus, you can switch therapists at any time. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. Talk it out with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at BetterHelp.com/roundtable. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/roundtable. All right, our listener question comes from Perla. Like I said, it's about the four of us. Perla writes, I truly have so much fun listening to the podcast every week. Thank you. We have fun making the podcast. The banter and exchange between all the members of the Roundtable makes it feel like I'm just hanging out with libertarian friends here in Missouri. That's a great state. So my question is, how well does everyone on the podcast actually get along? Are there any fun or interesting stories about first meetings or impressions of each other? Perla, if you want to see how we interact in person, I highly recommend coming out to our live shows or watching them on live stream or watching them on YouTube after the fact if you can't do either the first two. If nothing else, you get to see how we interact when we're all in the same room together. But I'm going to take moderator's privilege and I'm going to tell a story. And this is a story about Matt Welch.
Dun, dun,
about
dun.
Matt Welch, who hired me. And in fact, hired me kind of twice. Whether or not he regrets it now. Okay, so when I got hired at Reason, something that I think probably a lot of people don't know is that my first year, I was literally not even on Reason's payroll. I was on the payroll of an outside organization. I was funded through a 1-year fellowship. And this allowed Reason to take me on in a way that would make it very easy for them to just dismiss me after a year if I sucked. And so after a couple of months, I'd done some stuff that I think people had noticed. I'd had a piece in the Wall Street Journal that had been read into the Congressional Record about Obamacare, and it looked like I was doing okay. I was reasonably
productive. I thought
productive.
you said this was a story about Matt.
This is, and this is important.
Okay.
And so Matt Welch, and Matt and Nick had interviewed me and okayed the hire in the first place, but again, this was like a de-risked hire, right? So I was just there maybe he's gone in a year. So I think it must have been December of my first year after I'd been on staff or sort of quasi on staff for something like 6 months. And Matt's just like, come see me. And at this time, we were in our previous old office, and we had one separate room where you could go to, and it was our library. If you've seen our old videos, it's on camera a whole lot. But actually, there's in the videos, it looks like it's very light because we have all these stage lights. It's actually very dark. There's just one window in that room, and Matt was looking out the window away from me. And so he was silhouetted. Just this black silhouette, like a Denis Villeneuve movie, right? You can't, just a monument of Matt, and he was carrying a guitar. And without turning around to look at me at all, he just starts playing the guitar in music, he's accenting the things that he's saying. It's dramatic, and he's like, Peter, you're hired. You're going to get to stay on. You've done a good job. And I was like, anything else you want to tell me? Nope. Not really. Just that. And this is the story of how I got hired full-time at Reason, was Matt Welch with a guitar staring in silhouette out the window. And I think about this all the time because it's such a great Matt Welch story and such a good Reason story. It's how we do things here. Sometimes you get hired to a guitar song. Anybody else want to answer this question? Catherine, let's go with you.
I just want to regret that this question was picked. Go on, Catherine.
Yeah, it's a failure that goes...
I was Nick Gillespie's intern, and I just feel like that might explain a lot for people who don't know that. I was originally an intern at Reason. That summer, I had, I think, one phone conversation with Nick, and we talked about Nietzsche, and that was previously, that was the high point of my life to that moment, I would say. And sometimes I still get to talk about Nietzsche with Nick, though not as often as I would like.
Nick, since you were named... Do you want to answer the question?
Or not. Feel free to not.
It's all, it's all a blur. It's all a blur.
Okay.
Matt Welch, really how do you remember the guitar hiring moment is my question for you. But
why would you think I remember any moment in general, let alone
Matt's
once?
I do not think of you.
Fair enough. We're in the elevator, baby. No, I do have one fond early memory of my long and very sexual relationship with Nick Gillespie. Is that it was around 2003-ish or so. This is still talked about in my family. Nick was in town for probably promoting a Reason book. Maybe it was the Choice collection at the LA Press Club. And we had reason to hang out at a little shitty bar across the street from Cantor's in the Fairfax district. And it was me and Nick and Brian Doherty and one other person, I think. Maybe Jesse Walker was still haunting LA.
Like, as with most of your journalism, you have most of the actual facts wrong. But it was Junior's. It was Junior's Delicatessen in Westwood. But continue, sir.
It was not Westwood. I can absolutely guarantee that,
because this is the disgusting egg cream.
This is the answer, by the way, to your question, is that these two are like an old married couple, and no one gives a shit about where the diner was. Just tell the story.
I think it's very important. But go ahead.
So I was there with Emmanuel and Nick and Doherty and whoever the third wheel was. We're just talking at 5 trillion miles an hour about comic books and punk rock and the history of these libertarian thinkers and this guy over here and this economist, and it was just like bada bada boom, And after a while, me and Emmanuel looked at each other and just realized we are like cows blinking stupidly in a field. We just don't really understand even what people are talking about or what the references are. And I felt like, for 25 years ever since, I'm just blinking stupidly, basking in the brilliance and quick wit of Nick Gillespie et al.
Nietzsche had really nice things to say about the life experience of cows blinking stupidly in a field. Just to bring it all together.
And it ended well for him, right? He definitely would. He would have gone to Epstein's Island, right?
Oh God, Peter, save us.
I think he was there when they, when they broke ground on Pedo Castle. Matt, I will thank you and Emmanuel for at least one, maybe 200 to 500 occasions, figuratively saving my life while giving me a couch to flop on while visiting LA and being too drunk to drive. 9 times out of 10, you kept me from driving.
Was rough times.
Yeah. But so thank you very much.
Uber has definitely made the world a better place is the conclusion of this segment. Remember, we love to answer your questions about us, about policy, about many things. Please send your short, succinct, pithy, and not very long questions to podcasts@reason.com. That's podcasts@reason.com. And remember, if you want to see us answer even more of your questions, check out our YouTube channel, Reason Roundtable at YouTube. We will be answering more of your questions, including this week, a question about war. Okay, so the Senate finally voted to pass the DOGE cuts. Elon Musk started out promising $2 trillion in cuts. And then he was like, well, maybe more like $1 trillion. Oh, all right, that's a lot less, but it's still in the trillions. But this rescission bill, which is a bundle of spending clawbacks that went to Congress, totaled just $9 billion. Again, less than Trump is suing the Wall Street Journal for. Now, it's not nothing, but in the grand scheme of the federal budget, it is pocket change. About $8 billion of those cuts went to foreign aid, and about $1 billion came out of planned spending on public broadcasting, federal funding for PBS, NPR, and local affiliate stations. NPR only gets a very small percentage of its direct budget from federal funding, but smaller local public radio affiliates are often considerably more dependent on taxpayer money. And at least one analysis projects that nearly 20% of local stations could shutter because of these cuts, with rural areas in the South and Midwest hit particularly hard. So Matt, I want to start with you. Are the fearmongers right? Are dozens of local stations going to close? And if so, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Maybe. And also maybe not. Depends on how they act and how much value their listeners put into them and how they gear themselves either to start taking in more advertising to the extent that they're allowed to, because there's some rules that govern that, and how much they get listener support. We are in an atmosphere, and I wrote a feature about this for the Reason print magazine a few months back, where the institutional media has collapsed by about 80% by every possible measure. NPR has been part of that collapse too. Even the most popular parts of National Public Radio, in a very brief period of time, over 4 years, collapsed by like 25% just in that little brief period of time. So there is destruction and sometimes creative destruction and a lot of creativity in the audio world. I mean, my God, we're living through a podcast. We're doing a podcast right now. We're living through a podcast boom lit over the past 10 years, looked broadly, and which NPR has kind of leaned into. So, if 20% of community radio stations go under as a result of having become too dependent on public subsidies, I don't even know that's a large number against the backdrop of normal churn of things. As always, read your Jesse Walker about that, of different avenues available to the existing radio stations. I think this is great. Not the going out of business necessarily, but the getting government money out of the journalism business and the broadcasting business. There's no reason for it anymore. NPR in many ways, and PBS as well, led the process of people associating their fondness with a particular media outlet as an affinity. You're going to carry the NPR tote bag, right? You're going to do this and that, and it feels part of your identity. And now we've seen through Netflix, and then Substack, and then the rise of podcasts. Even you could say the GoFundMe is kind of like this too, or Kickstarter. That there are all these avenues now where people can express their affinity to organizations, even like Reason, and say, hey, look, I just want to positively identify with these people, and here's an easy fundraising way to do that. If these stations, these community stations, have that connection with an audience, arguably, they have a chance to be even better than before. And they no longer have to sort of gear their programming with the idea of what are these people going to like and tolerate and not. I think that government subsidies have rubbed off the eccentricities over community and public radio compared to what it was like in the dark old days before 1967 when we created the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. So I see this as a positive thing, and people will reorder and they'll create new media, and maybe some new thing that is currently unforeseen will rise up like a colossus in the middle of the community radio stream, and all is good for that. And thank God, by the way, that we got one half a day worth of budget cuts out of DOGE, 1/2 a day of federal spending.
If you can't cut funding for NPR or PBS at this late date in human history and in American history, then you can't cut anything. In that sense, the rescission bill, as pathetic as it is at least, a little cinder that we can kind of keep alit until we figure out what kind of tinder will blow this into a raging fire where we actually right-size the amount of government spending. The thing that I'll add to Matt's, encyclopedic kind of discussion of the topic is that the way that the NPR head went onto TV and radio and then started talking about how, if this gets cut, people will die, is one of the most shameful, pathetic Washington Monument meets the Liberty, the Statue of Liberty, like Hail Mary plays that I've ever seen. And they should be ashamed of themselves for saying that basically because this thing that exists, without it, there are people out there who don't have cable. There are people out there who don't have smartphones. There is not 100% internet penetration of everywhere on the world for people who want it in rural America. And so if you pull this away, somehow people are going to die. It's like, this is exactly why people stopped listening to public radio, because it is out of touch and out of tune with where things are and where reality is. The fact of the matter is that NPR, has some great programming and it has some great legacies. It can either flourish or it can disappear based on its ability to do its business in the time and place that it's happening, which is now absent federal funding. This is a small step for man, I think, when we look at it all.
I love this idea that NPR is like Obamacare, but for your car radio. I do want to talk about the kind of liberal bias aspect of this, Katherine. Most people, I think, would agree that NPR skews left, maybe even very left. It's only a little bit of an exaggeration to say you can Google just about anything that exists or has happened and find an NPR article about how it's problematic, right? Is it bad for the women, or is it going to cause climate change, right? It's just like, it's somehow or another, like, this is bad and maybe you shouldn't do it. So how much would you expect this defunding, this $1 billion cut here, to combat liberal media bias? Is this going to reduce the leftism in media?
No. Not even a little bit. And that's partially because it's not that big a chunk of media anymore. Obviously, I will be hardest hit by the cutting of public broadcasting funds since I'm a woman. But the where else are you going to get your tote bags? I have more tote bags than I could ever need in this life. But this is the main thing, is like, public broadcasting once occupied a much larger piece of the media landscape. And there probably was a moment, definitely was a moment, when people would die if we got rid of public broadcasting was more true. People did use it for kind of fundamental communication in a way that they just don't anymore. And I have to say, I'm not sure it's really gone. It's going to be back. That's my prediction.
You mean the subsidy?
The subsidy, yeah.
Yep.
So maybe this is all for naught.
Just also to pick up on another thread from Matt, which I think is important and also gives me the opportunity to make everybody, or at least Peter and Katherine, groan by name checking the Declaration of Independence, the book that we wrote a million years ago. The interest in having public broadcasting or a corporation for public broadcasting came out of an American inferiority complex that was still large in the 60s. We just weren't as good as Europe, and we didn't have fine arts and things like that. And people like Lyndon Johnson was particularly prone to that because he felt ashamed on some profound level of how he grew up in an uncultured, unelectrified part of Texas and things like that. And so the idea was that if we had public broadcasting and state-based things and things like the Kennedy Center, which I also wish would lose all of its funding, certainly from taxpayers, but we'll have a better we'll have a better world, and we'll be classier, and we'll be able to compete against Europe and other more civilized countries. And that was always bullshit. And in part of the Declaration of Independence, we talked about how during the Cold War, the U.S. government spent so much money trying to promote high culture that Americans could do high culture as well as anything else. And there's a line in there where, they send Van Cliburn, who was this Texas piano prodigy, and he was the first guy to stand toe to toe. He was the Bobby Fischer of piano competitions, where he stood up to the Soviets and were able to beat them at their own game. And isn't that great? And there's a line in the Declaration of Independence, which I think we are both proud of, but where it says, there were no revolutions named after Van Cliburn, but there is one named after the Velvet Underground. And the whole point of the genius of America and of American art and American culture and American sprezzatura, if that's not a surreal term to use, is that we do things independent of the state. And we create, we innovate. Rock and roll did not get a penny in subsidies, and it took over the world. All of the high art and all of the bullshit late age jazz and modern dance and all of the stuff that the government spent tons of money promoting throughout the Cold War amounted to nothing compared to what Americans actually rooting around in their basements and their backyards and their garages created. That's what is American culture, and that's what NPR stood athwart of.
Matt, I want you to put all of this together with what else is happening in media right now. So MSNBC and CNN are struggling. They look like past their prime businesses. The Washington Post opinion page, where my wife works, is going through staff turnover, is being reoriented around what owner Jeff Bezos describes as something like free markets and individual liberty, which sounds familiar and good, right? Bezos is also just rumored, to have looked at buying Vogue, although that's very much unconfirmed. You have outlets like the Free Press, which is pushing 170,000 paid subscribers through Substack. And there are reports out this week that it might be bought by David Ellison, who's also in the process of buying Paramount, which owns CBS, and that there might be some sort of synergy there. And it was just announced that Stephen Colbert, late night's #1 Trump hater, is ending what some have portrayed as is ending, right? And some have said that this is a politically motivated cancellation, although at least other folks are saying, well, look, it's just that the show cost $100 million a year. So my question, I think, is is the liberal media, the mainstream media, as we have known it with its liberal bias, kind of maybe over?
I think it's just more that the extent to which institutional media exists and has influence and power, it's not there. And people, it has gone down by 80% in a pretty short period of time. And people on the right actually haven't fully adapted to that, because you still need the media to be an all-powerful boogeyman, punching bag. Fake news is planting these stories again, and et cetera. It just doesn't have that much power. I'm old enough to remember when newspapers like the LA Times, where I used to work, was a kingmaker in California politics. The 1988 presidential election, 2 or 3 different candidates were basically defenestrated by interactions with media. Gary Hart on the monkey business, Bernard Shaw just destroyed Michael Dukakis with a single question at a presidential debate. All of that it's not imaginable anymore. And I I treasure some of those old media institutions and some of the journalism provided by it, but they sowed their own demise on business levels, on professionalism levels, and so on. Stephen Colbert made $20 million a year, or is making $20 million a year. I'm not going to weep for an now unfunny, formerly very funny comedian losing his television show. What I do weep for is that the president of the United States is serially suing various places and applying pressure on corporate media to try to bring them to heel. And it sadly is working on some occasions. I hope that there's a nice, vigorous fight with Rupert Murdoch over the Wall Street Journal, and I tend to imagine that there will be. So it's not that the liberal media isn't liberal or progressive, probably much more so than 5 years ago. But the media freaked out so badly in 2020 amidst all this different changes going on. There's such a freak out over race and circular firing squads and Me Too and a bunch of other things that was kind of a pre-Cambrian explosion of new outlets out there. Free Press, Persuasion, Dispatch, Bulwark, if you like that kind of stuff.
Hey, the Bulwark just passed 100,000 paid subscribers, according to
Jennifer Rubin has a lot of subscribers too. But like the point is, the people can go and they have places to do it, and they're building new media all around us, and that is great. We should, those of us who could both consume and take part in media, should love a moment of great creativity in media creation, and I'm glad that Reason gets to be part of those stories. Any story about like the new stuff that's come up in the last 5 years, Reason is always sort of in the middle and dealing with those people and publishing those people, and it's great. We've managed, thanks in no small part to some of the people on this podcast, to adapt with the times and to and stay relevant even at a time that most other media is despised.
All right, let's move on to our cultural recommendations, what we've been watching, reading, otherwise consuming this week. I'm going to start because my pick ties into many of this week's themes. I watched the movie Eddington. It's the pandemic film by Ari Aster, the director of horror hits Hereditary and Midsommar. It takes place in a small town in the West in the summer of 2020, and it is the story of a person and a town and a nation going utterly batshit mad. So the main character is a sheriff played by Joaquin Phoenix who has trouble breathing in his mask. And one of the first scenes is between that sheriff and police from a nearby tribal district, and they are demanding that he put a mask on, even though he's sitting alone in his car in the middle of nowhere. He protests. He says, "You're not listening to me." And one of them immediately fires back, "I am listening. Shut up." And that is like the first scene in the movie, and then everything flows from that. And this spirit captures so much of the insane and contentious way that 2020 went down. It brought the movie brings politics into it because the sheriff ends up running for mayor on an anti-mask, pro-Bitcoin, and maybe pro-conspiracy platform that also just is kind of generally crazy and zany, but has a bunch of stuff that you're going to be kind of sympathetic to. The mayoral candidate, the other mayoral candidate is this sort of rich bougie liberal played by Pedro Pascal. It's just kind of perfect. You also have Black Lives Matter protesters throughout here, and they are making absolute fools of themselves. Some of the funniest bits in this movie are about the protesters awkwardly interrogating their whiteness, which has definitely made some of the movie's critics really mad. But this is fundamentally a story of an individual and a community and then a country just going collectively insane. It actually starts with this weird shot of a bum crazy guy just wandering through the desert, and he comes across this town of Eddington, right? And you can just tell he's deranged. There's something wrong with him. There's something deeply wrong with everyone. And the movie develops this idea as it goes through. The final hour becomes this bizarre and violent fantasia, very surreal, almost David Lynchian, but that's part of the point. 2020 was so surreal and so bizarre and disconnected from reality that is the only way to portray it, as a crazed and violent farce where even in retrospect, it is hard to know exactly what happened, exactly what we all went through. But we can all agree that something truly bonkers really did happen to all of us. And this movie is, I think, a good first step in helping us to process it. Not that maybe anyone saw it. Katherine, what have you been watching, reading, otherwise consuming?
My recommendation is also thematic to this podcast. I'm finally watching Only Murders in the Building, which I know I am very late to, but it is classified in my Netflix or whoever is hosting it as a bumbling detective. I love a good bumbling detective, and there are 3 of them. Martin Short, Steve Martin, and Selena Gomez team up to figure out what happened after someone dies in their fancy building in New York. It's, Tina Fey shows up in there. Sting shows up in there. It's got Meryl Streep. It's very, very good cameos. And it is about how rumors turn into conspiracy theories and how conspiracy theories breed actual conspiracies, and also about how new media is good and bad because they are making a podcast just like we are. So which one of us is Martin Short, which one of us is Steve Martin, and which one of us is Selena Gomez? I'll let you all decide. Only Murders in the Building. Very good.
That is next week's listener question. You're a listener, right, Katherine?
I am. Sometimes.
Nick Gillespie, do you have a cultural recommendation for us?
Yeah, well, also in keeping with today's podcast, I watched Pretty Baby with Brooke Shields.
Oh, no.
That's a joke. That's a joke. Matt.
Okay.
Matt, you
I'm
look
laughing.
puzzled. You look puzzled by that. You don't know what Pretty Baby is. Google it later and maybe watch it with your daughters.
When you're older.
Okay? Yeah.
These cultural references, Nick, I'm still just a
from
stupid cow in a field.
Exactly the same year as the Bad News Bears came out, Matt. And you may remember it as the nation's bicentennial. But be that as it may, no, what I want to recommend is something that I got to see in person. A few weeks ago, I went to Freedom Fest, which was held in Palm Springs this year, an annual gathering of libertarians, conservatives, and various other people talking about topics of broad interest to, I think to a reasoned audience. But it was Ross Ulbricht's second kind of public appearance. And his, in the notes, we'll put a link to where it's queued up so that you can start watching Ross Ulbricht. He's introduced by Kennedy. Ross in this talks about what it was like to be in the federal penitentiary system. And apart from all sorts of other things, his description of what it is like to be in a maximum security prison with no realistic hope of getting out, and the way that people are treated and dehumanized there for no positive reason. It is not to reform them or rehabilitate them or to make them penitent. It is just a bad, awful system that proceeds from a sentencing system, which has nothing to do with justice or rehabilitation or anything like that. It is an incredibly powerful oration by a guy who has, and this is the one unalloyed good thing that Donald Trump has done as president, who was pardoned for his non-crimes of running the Silk Road. It's an incredible statement, and he also talks a little bit about the organization that his mother, Lynn Ulbricht, who I know and have talked to, and Reason has talked to over the years, who has started an organization called Mothers Against Cruel Sentencing, which again is not it is not about saying prison shouldn't exist, cops shouldn't exist. There is no right or wrong. It is about, if you want to have a criminal justice system that actually helps society function better and keeps people safe and makes people whole, both inside and outside, we need to be doing something radically different. And Ross Ulbricht's, remarks at Freedom Fest are just, they have haunted me since I've heard them. And it's a remarkable and important and compelling oration. So check that out.
Matt Welch, what do you have for us?
So I watched a movie that has zero relevance to today's episode, though it certainly has some relevance to Nick Gillespie's childhood and, more importantly, to the politics and government policy that we're seeing in this year of our Lord 2025. It's called Cabrini. It's about Mother Cabrini, Italian patron saint of Italian immigrants in the United States.
The namesake of the worst public housing project in American history, pretty much.
Not wrong.
So, because America is anti-Catholic, Matt Welch.
America
more than anything
has had. I mean, what's one of the fun things about the movie is that because the Irish have already come in first, so the one half of the Gillespie evil clan has made their way in New York and are in positions of power. They look down on the Italians so very much, and a lot of the movie is kind of about that tension. But if you're not familiar with the story, this is the first American saint, an incredible woman who came on. She had sort of a post-tubercular lung. She wasn't expected to live that long, but she had this very strong vision that she was going to lead like worldwide missions to China and elsewhere. And the Pope eventually, because she's so nagging at him and everybody else so much, he's like, all right, if you want to help people, help the miserable Italians in New York, because that is a level of misery no one has ever really seen before. Forget Calcutta or wherever else. Like, have you seen the Italians? Have you been to 5 Points? It's a great story about New York assimilation, immigration, and it's told in a very feminist and rightly so kind of way. It's the first sort of international order in the Catholic Church led by women. And it's I pair it up with the movie Harriet that came out 6-7 years ago. I think, is that the name? Is either Harriet or Tubman. Very kind of similar small movies. This one, could have stood another 20 minutes worth of editing, let's say, but just very interesting and moving. And for those of us who've been lucky enough to enjoy the Cabrini-ania in New York City, it's just kind of wonderful. I also recommend going to where I think it's her burial place, close to where she had her first mission, up by the cloisters in New York. There's a church there, and I might have recommended that before. It's kind of like a modernist church even, where there's a big shrine to her, and it's beautiful, and I highly recommend going to see it. But Cabrini, directed by Alejandro Gomez Monteverde last year. It was a 2024 movie, and it bombed. So watch it if you're interested in the history, and maybe give it a little support.
All right. As always, if you like this podcast, you can support us by going to reason.com/donate. That's reason.com/donate. Thank you so much for listening. The Reason Roundtable will return.